and I'm welcoming you to my video on making the quilt you see behind me, Snowball's Chance. I'm going to do a quick how-to on making the blocks, and then stay tuned after if you want more information. I'm going to talk about my Scrappy border, and I'm going to make a second video, so there'll be a part 2. So see you there. We'll start with the Snowball square. The Snowball square is a square of fabric with 4 triangles on the corners, and we achieve that with 5-inch squares and 2-inch squares on the corner, sewn on the diagonal. So you can use layer cakes, pre-cut 5-inch squares, yardage that you have, or any scrap you can find. Each block is made of 9 squares. That's called a 9 patch. The Snowball's Chance quilt has 12 blocks of 9 patches. Each individual block has 1 colorway and 1 corner colorway. I like to make the corners with high contrast to really make the fabric sing, and I like each block to be beautiful by itself, so I design them individually. For my sample quilt, I'm going to use 12 different fabrics, and I'm going to use a black with white and a white with black for the contrasting corners. However, you can do any combination of fabrics and colors you want, and I'll have some show and tell at the end to give you some ideas of what other people are doing right now. So stay tuned. If you're using scraps or pre-cuts, go ahead and use your 5-inch squares. If you're using yardage, cut 2 strips 5 inches wide by the width of fabric for the squares, and 2 strips 2 inches wide by width of fabric for the corners. Cut 9 5-inch squares for each block, and cut 36 2-inch squares for each block. So that would be 4 squares per corner. 4 times 9, 36. For the Scrappy border version, you'll have a 5-inch strip left over. Cut 14 inches off of that, and then make it 4 1/4 inches tall. We'll fix the dimensions of this later. Then take the remainder of your fabric, choose 4 of them, and make 4 corners, 4 1/4 inches square, and then all the rest of it cut into 2 1/2-inch strips for binding for the quilt. Here comes the fun part, the sewing. Okay, use your favorite method. You can draw a line across the diagonal and sew right across that diagonal line. You don't even have to pin. You could align some blue tape straight with your needle, and then you'll just watch the corner of that fabric go right up the edge of that blue tape, right where I'm pointing there. Just watch that line. Or use one of those gadgets you bought that one time at that store. Remember the thing that's in your cupboard? Oh my gosh. This one is the Sew Perfect Angles that I bought one time, and it's from New Leaf Stitches. It works really well. Or if you're really tricky, you can just eyeball sew corner to corner. They're pretty small squares, so that works just fine. See? Be super careful. You can use scissors, or you can use a rotary cutter to remove the corners, leaving a 1/4 inch seam. I can use a ruler pretty safely. How about you? I encourage the tricky ruler maneuver. You see the 1/4 inch line on this ruler? There's my seams, 1 there and 1 on the other side. So if I put the 1/4 inch of the ruler on the stitches themselves, then when I cut here and here, I've got a perfect 1/4 inch seam, and I've protected my fingers. So turn it over, put the 1/4 inch line of the ruler on the stitches, and trim and trim. Now that's a tricky ruler maneuver, don't you think? Et voila, you have your block. You're so tricky and good. A good pressing goes a long way, but these are pretty easy. I want to set the seam first by ironing it flat, and then I just gently pull each corner open and iron it flat. You can do that. See? Sliver trimming, now that is tricky. Do you see how my block looks a little bit wonky on the corners? Well, I can put the edge of my ruler and just kind of get that yucky bits off. See that? Right here you can see this black parts are sticking out. I'll use the good edge of the inner square and just make a little sliver trim. That's going to be great. Okay, I pin because I find that the way I iron it, I have to flip some of the seams. Let me show you what that means. See how my seams are faced the same way right here? If I reverse them like this and I stick a pin in to hold the new direction flat like that, then I have them reversed and they're nested so they cuddle up really nicely. So I'll flip that one and then I'll flip this one here and put a pin in this side. And that way I can just have the seams nested really nice and tight. So that's what it will look like before you sew. At least if you're me. We're going to do a technique called lacing. And that's where when you sew your blocks together, you'll actually leave the thread sewing between the blocks, like I'm going to show you here, a few extra stitches, and then you'll tuck the next block up, tuck it under your presser foot, and keep sewing without disconnecting. So you see I'm doing a little zhuzhing here. I'm tucking it over and trying to get everything tidied. Then I'm going to make a few stitches in between, add the next one, and do a little adjusting and keep going along this seam till I get to the very end. And then when I get to the end, you have the option to backstitch or not, and I do backstitch on this step when I think about it. So you'll take this out of the machine and take your pins out, but you won't cut these threads that are connecting the pieces together. Then you will pin the third block to the second set of blocks, but you'll keep that lacing stitch in the middle, and then you'll just do the same procedure down here. I'm going to show you some fast mow sewing, and you'll get this second seam sewn, and then you'll basically have a little laced piece of fabric. So some fast mow sewing for you. Voila! So now when you press the rows, I will let you trim the lacing stitches here. I want you to turn the block over, and I want you to iron the new seams in opposite directions. You see I'm starting over here, and I'm actually taking the block and putting those seams from the corners the direction that I flipped them to, and then I'm taking this center one, I'm ironing the new seams to the left, and then I'll iron the other seams to the right and try to tidy up the blocks as I go. So here I'm going the top and bottom ones to the right. And you don't have to have yours so close together. This is just for TV. Now for the 9 patches, you'll pin the rows together and you'll sew it into the block. So I'm nesting the seams just like I did when I was sewing the pairs of squares together, and I'll nest the side seams and get it all pinned up, and it will look like this, all ready to go, and that should hold it pretty much until I get it all sewn together. And good luck! You can do it! Things are speeding up here. It's time to sew the rows to make the 9 patch blocks. So you've pinned those rows nicely. You're going to just, super fast mow sew like this. And I just wanted to show you this part because I want you to see that I'll stop like right here. I have the seam underneath that's flipped the wrong way, so I have to stop, pick it up, flip it back, get it going, and that's all just sort of part of the process when you're working with little pieces like this. So a little fussing as you go. You can't just like power through this. You really have to kind of make sure you get to each seam that they're staying nested, even if you've pinned really well. And when you get to the end, I do backstitch. Oh my gosh, you made it to the 9 patch. So I want you to press it, and I want you to start by keeping that seam closed and doing what we call setting the seam, which is ironing it shut. And then you can push it open and push it away from you, and that'll get it folded to one side. Then I want you to flip it over, and you can either just leave it like this and iron it down nicely. I ended up opening this second set of seams, as you can see me doing here, so I'm sort of putting my finger in and tucking that tip of the iron along. This is not necessary. I found that it does make it lay flatter, but you could certainly just iron it flat and move on, baby. You know I'm gonna like you whether you iron it flat or open or inside out or backwards. So flip it over, press it from the front side super flat. You can do all your zhuzhing. Repeat on the other seam. And then my last little thing is I want you to set with steam if you have steam in your iron, which I don't. So I use a spritz of water and I get it damp, and then I just give it one last press and I let it cool on the pressing mat, and I find that helps the whole quilt stay flatter as I'm working. So fast mo pressing, spritz, 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 and you're done. Yay. Yay. And still zhuzhing. Yay. You have the option now to do a little sliver trimming if you have these outies or hairy bits. So line the ruler up with the edge of the squares and just cut those outies and hairies off. For the Scrappy border, put your quilt blocks in the order that you like, and then place the borders around the edge of the quilt and choose your 4 corners. Here's the one thing you have to do to make this border work. You need to measure your blocks, and you need to cut the length of your border pieces to how wide your blocks are. They need to match. Mine turned out to be 13 3/4, which is not what the math says they should be. So measure your actual blocks and make your borders that actual width, and then it'll be perfect. Once you've done that, all you'll have to do is sew the border pieces in when you sew the whole quilt together. You will lace the quilt top just like you did the 9 patch, starting on the left side. Sew the rows, keeping them attached between the blocks, and then you'll sew the vertical seams and you're all finished. You won't have to add an additional border because you're done. Woo-hoo! Woohoo! No. That's terrible. Stop it. Make it stop. Oh, I can't. No, make it stop. I can't. Oh, so cute. So cute. Oh, not this again. I can't do this. Make it stop. Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, nice there. Oh, yeah. Way up. Zhuzzy, zhuzzy, zhuzzy. Oh, yeah. Oh, eyebrows. Ooh, lips. Ooh, face. Oh, not this again. Oh, yeah. Zhuzz it, zhuzz it. It's all done. And you're going to